Welcome to Finance at the Jobsite, the podcast where construction finance meets the field. I'm your host, Rishi founder of Being Human. In each episode, I sit down with construction CFOs, controllers, owners, project managers, IT leaders, ERP consultants, and industry experts to uncover how they connect the back office with the field, choose and implement technology, manage cash flow, and drive profitable projects. Whether you are running the numbers, leading the team, or designing the systems that keep projects moving, this is your place to learn what's working, what's broken, and what's next in construction finance. Today, our guest is Zach Duncan from Knight Electric. Zach, welcome.
Thank you, Rishi, for having me.
First section here is on your career journey and leadership growth. You've been in electrical construction since the day after high school graduation and worked your way from the field to project management. Looking back, what were the key inflection points that moved you from twisting wire nuts to running large projects and teams?
That's a great question, and I get that a lot due to my age. But I just learned at an early age the knowledge of having in what you do, and I was always around my father at a young age, making deals and a lot of real estate people, and sitting in the backseat of a car listening to conversations that I had no idea were about, and asking questions and wanting to know what they were about. And I've kind of carried that throughout my career. If you don't know it, find somebody that does and ask them. And that's kind of carried me throughout my career. And as soon as I got in the trade, especially in the field, you step into a brand new trade and don't know anything about it. And my first as a foreman, I probably made him angry some days with the amount of questions I asked. And I'll say that's kind of what kickstarted my career. Find a room that you're the dumbest person in, and when you finally become the smartest, you find a new room. So that is kind of what kickstarted the growth in my journey, and just continuing to learn and ask the questions, and if you come across something you don't know, figure it out. And whether that's the interweb these days, or AI, or listening or having a conversation about something I did not.
People who make a big in the world, they have growth mindset instead of fixed mindset. You can learn almost anything.
Yeah, and I like being a problem solver. I like being called upon when somebody has an issue, and I like having an answer. Not all the time do I have it, but I'm quick to tell somebody if I don't have an answer. But I'm also quick to find that answer and call them back.
Cool. At Rogers Electric, you manage projects in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. How did the national exposure change the way you think about risk, logistics, and cash flow compared to a contractor who mostly works in one region?
That's another good one. I mean, like you said, I've worked in all 50 and outside of that, but it really puts in perspective the market change from region to region, and from one side of the country to the other, or even outside the country, whether that is permitting, licensing, labor, or anything, especially logistics. And it helped drive a logistics approach to managing projects like that and programs like that. You understand that, West Coast work is probably a little more delayed and farther out due to, licensing, permitting jurisdictions and stuff like that, to where you kind of looked at an approach of maybe starting on an East Coast project and giving the West Coast project time to catch up. And by the time you finish East Coast, West Coast was ready, or something like that. And especially you get to an early project and you're able to get some early cash flow, get positive in that aspect to take it elsewhere and be able to comfortably set forth on a market or a region that you may not have been so comfortable on before. So that's kind of where that came from. But honestly, at the end of the day, you were hired to execute project, execute contracts. Whether it was in Maine, Michigan, Oregon, Canada, Alaska, Hawaii, you make phone calls and you problem solve and you make it happen. A lot of late nights, a lot of phone calls to get some work done. And some difficult places to get to, but that's kind of how that came about. The national exposure is great, just because you get to see the market in every which way or fashion it is. It's a lot easier to work in a South Georgia market than it is a Washington State market. But you also, with that being said, you get to learn, kind of how to approach, certain situations and get that exposure to all aspects of it.
So, how's South Georgia market different from the Washington market?
So, South Georgia. I live in Georgia, worked in South Georgia, down in the Savannah market. They built a lot of Target, retailers built a lot of distribution centers down there. Cheap land, pretty fast build, which is where we come into play. Fast build is, jurisdictions, permitting, manpower. It's not so hard to get down there. They kind of still work on the good old boy system, the old school construction handshake market, and it's a lot easier to. If you're caught in a permitting hangup, you call the chief inspector and you give him your name, you tell them the problem and you fix the problem and you get off the phone, the problem solved. And
Hmm.
it's a lot easier. It's easier to build that way. In some places, you can build that way, but it may come back and bite you in the butt. Just because not everybody adheres to a handshake anymore, hopefully so. And that differentiates from a Washington State market to where you get. I've had permits get hung up in a building inspection portal for 18 months. So you call up there every day and call back, or they'll tell you to call back, or you got to get with the chief building inspector, and you get with them, and hey, look, dude, I've got 100 people trying to build within a square mile of where you're trying to build. You're not the most important to me. Nobody's most important. I've got a queue of stuff to get through, and we don't care what you offer up. You're what you so it just it varies. But like I said, at the end of the day, you got hired and you sign the contract to get the job done, and what you got to do. Sometimes you got to get permit expediters involved, and maybe sometimes I've had to fly out to building departments and hey, let's just sit down, let's work this out, and what's your hang up? Here's my solution, and move on. That's kind of how that's how it differentiates all across the country. I've never met one jurisdiction the same as the other, and they're the authority holding jurisdiction. So whether it's in or out of a code book, it don't matter what you have to say. They have the final say, and you got to find a way to work.
Yeah, great answer. Coming from a massive contractor with 1,700 employees into a much smaller, fast growing firm, what have you learned about overhead, decision making speed, and margin discipline that you wish more owners and CFOs understood?
So you learn that even though it's not a direct correlation, but overhead grows when a company grows. That's kind of just simple stuff. Being from a large firm like I was for many years, the growth was there, but it was not at a significant pace like a smaller firm would be. So you have more time to plan and prepare. You know when things are coming in. There's a big team built in place to make you aware of those things. But coming into a smaller firm like I am now, you have a significant rise pretty quick. And you gotta adapt and overcome and find ways. But the good thing, the big difference between a big firm and a smaller firm is is the executive branch of a company. I like to call it is. It's a lot easier to make a phone call at a smaller firm and get on the phone and have that conversation, to where at a larger firm it could take a weeks or even a month to kind of figure those processes and stuff out, and you just got to manage it. But at the end of the day, we've all heard of time's money. So if you waste time waiting on an answer, at say a larger place, that could cost you some money. And I've had it happen before, where I've sat waiting on responses or answers, and the time that I spent waiting, I could have adapted and overcame to another solution. It definitely varies, but at the end of the day, you're hired to kind of to drive that. So you've got to stay in the know. You've got to keep your nose poked into the business side of it, and just figure out what's coming in, what's going out. And you're not always going to be perfect at it. You're not always going to hit it on the head, and sometimes you do. But doing the best you can by keeping your nose in the business and tracking that stuff, it helps a lot.
Yeah, yeah. The growth at a smaller firm like the one that you have, it can be very fast and challenging too.
You may start at a smaller firm, everything's kind of been put in place when I came here, but you might not have certain things put in place that, within the year's growth, you got to put those things in place, which eventually equals to more overhead and what have you. So that just comes to the fact of keeping your nose in this business side of it, and keeping it going, because, at the end of the day, that drives it, costs across the board, drives the bottom line. And the bottom line is what everybody looks at. But being able to predict that bottom line and be forthfront with it.
Looking 5 to 10 years out, what's your vision for where you personally want to be? Whether that's running a division, owning a company, or something else. And what milestones are you focused on hitting before you would feel ready to take that owner risk you described?
Oh, that's another great question. It's one I've personally been challenged myself over the last couple of years. Is, I wouldn't say making the next step or the next move, but more or less, with not 5 to 10 year, but the 15 to 20 year plan looks like. I'm kind of one of those forefront seeing guys. I wake up every day and look forward to the day, but sometimes you get to think about the 10 to 15 year plan, which you should. But I do see myself running, in a 5 to 10 year plan. I do see myself running the vision of a company, and just continue to build on my assets and building my business side of the industry and operations and everything in between, to where I'm an asset to a company to be able to run a division efficiently and profitably. But I continue to ask myself the question just about every night of taking that next step, and when does that step start? When do you take it? And I really think that comes with relationships and strong ones at that. I continue to build those every day in the market, getting to know people and everything like that. Because the more you know and the more people sometimes the easier it is to call on and have the resources in your back pocket and inside your phone, than it is to take that step and then try to go find them. So that's kind of where that comfortable move would be for me. But at the end of the day, it don't matter how many people you still got to get a job done. If you can't drive that, it doesn't matter. So I think down the road that'll be the step I make. When those relations are strong and the comfort's there. At the end of the day, that's not just within a business side of it, but back a house side of it. Knowing people that I trust and believe that could help take it to the top, and build a strong firm. So that day could be tomorrow. I doubt it. It could be next year, but I think that would be the comfortable spot for when I get ready to step out.
Yeah, it's never gonna be comfortable stepping out of your
Mm-mm.
comfort
It
zone and
never will.
trying to do something by yourself. At some point, you'll have to just take the leap of faith.
You just gotta do it. And even when you do feel comfortable, when you actually do it, you're gonna be sitting around going, "Well, here we are," and you're gonna get that uneasy feeling again of, "All right, now we got it. Now we actually got to execute."
Yeah.
But having the people behind you to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, like having your face out here in the public, all the owners and GCs seeing you, that's gonna help.
Yeah.
The next section here is acts on specialty trade operations and market trends. Knight Electric is only a few years old, but already has 90 to 100 field electricians and a lean office staff. From your seat, what does strategic growth actually look like day to day, and how do you avoid chasing the wrong revenue?
Well, to be honest, you got to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, especially early. You start a company and you get a year or two in, and you chase everything from one side of the market to the other. You never really get good at anything. It's for now, which is the retail market. And like I said, you really have to know what it is, and that's what we found. We've built on that, and we've continued to grow that for ourselves. Go drive down the road 5 miles in any town, really, just about these days, and tell me how many retailers you see between your Targets, your Walmarts, your grocers, and everything in between. That's what we find ourselves, just because they're a little bit of everywhere, and they're all kind of moving to the same thing, which is customer facing, making a great customer experience, and that's what we've been doing since we've been in business. And I wouldn't say it's an uncapped market, but it's one that's ever moving. To where we feel comfortable in it. Strategic growth, as I say, is a smart, sustainable take on 5 different markets at one time. You might not be profitable. Eventually you probably will. But we could go out and sign many more contracts than we do now. So there's some months where I feel like we say no more than we say yes, but that's due to just knowing our lane. But you also have to find that fine line of quote unquote. So, that's kind of the road that we found ourselves on here lately is figuring out when we cross that line and we start driving on the other side of the road. You don't want to say yes to everything, and that could decline profits and reputation, which ultimately affects the bottom line. And so that is kind of where we've found our bread and butter is, finding that and running, being transparent, being honest, being upfront, and being able to build to where, like I said, one day it's kind of an uncapped market, but maybe one day we feel like we've capped it out to where we can, and then we find our next avenue to transition into and then start it from the bottom. And
Well, finding the right revenue is so important.
it you gotta know what you're doing, and you gotta do it well. If you know what you're doing, but you're trying to do 10 things at one time, and you're not everybody.
You said Knight is being very deliberate about when to jump into big ticket markets like data centers. What financial and operational criteria have to be true before you would feel comfortable taking on a $20, 20 to $100 million project?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of touched on the last topic. We haven't capped out our retail market in our eyes, but we're still building and growing in that aspect. So it doesn't make sense to us to, or at least at the moment, to jump into another world like that, because that is a completely different world. Whether it's your data centers, your aviation, your government, all of that is kind of their own lane within themselves. And that kind of goes back to the last question. We found ours, and we're still building it, we're still growing it, we're still profiting it. And why it doesn't make sense to us yet. You could call me next week, and we may have moved, but that's kind of why. It's kind of like when you ride your first bike. You don't take the training wheels off first and then try to you leave the training wheels on, you get comfortable with it, and then you're ready to spread your wings and take the training wheels off. And we're not in our training wheel phase anymore, but we're just getting comfortable riding, and eventually we're going to in touch the other markets. And also resource wise, there's the retail market don't suck up a whole lot of, I say a whole lot of your resources, but they suck them up, but they don't suck up your whole manpower. So being able to maneuver around different parts of the country and take on various things comfortably, and make 5 people happy instead of just one is a lot more beneficial to us, especially as a steady growing company right now, is getting our face out there to many reputable companies, and building those relationships. So that's kind of what we sit right now on that. Like I said, you call me in January next year. We may just have said yes. Finally, have said yes to one.
Yeah. The data center demand is enormous
It
right
is.
now.
It is.
And the
It is.
2026 is going to be even bigger.
Yep. The multi-year program or projects, a couple hundred guys, the high revenue small company could do one project a year, and keep cash flow going, keep business afloat. But, that's not our model. That's a few things we talked about. So, we'll see where it takes us, and that's what, if data centers does that for us, we'll take that resource and run with it.
You used the phrase get in or get out to describe today's construction market. For specialty trades specifically, what does getting in look like when it comes to trends like EV charging, battery storage, solar, and AI/data center work?
That side of the house, it's a fast paced moving market. And if you decide to tap into that market, you've got to get in, you've got to jump in, you got to swim fast, and you got to grow, and you got to learn in it. Because those new markets, they're not going to wait on you to learn and build. You've got to move with them. So that's kind of the get in and get out, side of the house. And we pre-planned, prepared, and build teams, and we're committed to growing with them, and learning with them, because they still are new things, so they're still figuring out the glitches and whatnot. And you got to understand on something new like that. They've been building buildings for how many years? Don't get me wrong, the new and up and coming thing comes out every year, but on these type of things, they haven't been doing them. So they're moving, and a smaller company, it could really derail you if a big shift happens in something, and you got to move with it, or put the resources in it to learn and grow in it. But that's kind of you got to get in or get out and commit. Either commit or don't commit. And it all comes down to kind of knowing your place in that market, or that industry. But that's kind of where the get in and get out comes from. Use that. I'm sure GCs probably say that I had 500 dimes a day is, either get in with me and let's ride this wave, or don't. Don't call me every month and maybe want a piece of the pie, maybe not. So that's kind of where that comes from.
The electrical scope touches nearly everything in a building: lighting, refrigeration, telecom, HVAC power, EV chargers, and more. When you sit down with a GC or owner, what do you wish they understood better about cost drivers and risk on the electrical side?
Yeah, well, that's a kind of a conversation for all industries and in all aspects. A key aspect to drive any type of work is the cost is a big one, but it's whether scope, jurisdiction, time of year, many other things could affect the way you install something. And sometimes people see things for black and white. They see the paper, they see calls for, XYZ, and that's what they see. And, our job is to look at that and see it happening in real time and quote accordingly. That sometimes is where the disconnect comes from is, you have a contractor, general contractor saying, let's just doing this. And then, you list off the 5 things it takes to do that. This is an area that I can only be in to work for 2 hours a day or night, and has a drop zone and a hard zone and this. So I have to get this special equipment and this, and it drives, cost up to do that. And, it could be something as simple as it's a small, pipe and wire home run pool, and it's like, well, yeah, but I can only get on the sales floor for 30 minutes a night, and so I'm gonna have to spread this across 5 nights, when if it wasn't that way I could get it done in 5 hours. So, just bridging that gap, being transparent most of the time will solve that issue. They might not like what they're hearing, but at least they're hearing it. Instead of just giving it to them and no conversations be had, and then the time comes, which I've had happen on projects. So, why ain't this done? And then you have to have the conversation with everybody in the room. When it's, I wouldn't say too late, but it's well past due. So, that's kind of, cost drivers and risks on the electrical side. There's a lot of risk, just due to, like you said, we touch just about everything in the building. Just about in any building these days takes some type of something that we have to give it. Dissecting that, and also comes on our responsibility of knowing what it takes. We don't want to go in it also looking at it black and white, and then come time to do it, and it's like, well, we need a schedule extension, or we need this, and when the schedule's already tight. Transparency, and just calling somebody and explaining things, and especially the ever-changing market of the EV and the data center, and you never know what you're going to run into. And I think I'm a big person. I use the upper half of the phone rather than, hey, look, this is what XYZ is going to take, and here's what we're looking at. Can you understand that? Like I said, sometimes you're going to, well, I appreciate you calling me. I didn't like what I hear, but I heard it. I'm glad you laid that out to me. I'll take it back to the owner. I'd rather have that conversation before a job ever starts, and until we're all standing there looking at it, scratching our heads, going, well, here we are.
Yeah. The longer you keep that Band-Aid on, the more problematic it will become.
Exactly.
So the next section here, Zach, is on pre-construction, cash flow, and financial realities. You are now in a hybrid role, bridging operations, pre-construction, and technical sales. What are the most common disconnects you see when projects move from estimating into operations, and how are you trying to close that gap?
First phrase that comes to mind is handoff. Handing a project off of pre-con to operations. So we've probably all seen it time and time again. Takes it all the way to award phase, and then it kind of sits there, and then contract comes in, and then operations comes in, and then they're trying to dig into the project a week before it starts, and have all their questions, and asking where XYZ came from, and where did we put this, and where did we put that, which ultimately affects the bottom line of getting the job done efficiently and properly. And I like to implement reviews between our operations and brick. Bob might look at a job that's bidding it, and he might see the installation going this way, and Tom, that's going to be managing the project, might see it this way, and they need to converse and figure out where it came from to where that flow from pre-construction to operations. It's just a seamless flow. It's just a change in name instead of a change of scope. But that's really where I like to. I'm trying to come in, especially a year right now, and in this time of year, where a lot of projects for 2026 are getting awarded. We got a little bit of downtime before they start, and pick up the phone, call somebody, let's review, and let's close that gap of before the contract even comes in the hand. Everything that's on that piece of paper, understand what's on it. If you don't understand it, let's figure it out.
Yeah, the communication is so important. You talked about how capital and cash flow can make or break a young construction business, especially when a $2 million job might not start for months. How do you think about setting up jobs so you are not upside down on cash the first 60 to 90 days?
Setting up a job right. I think they used the term finance the job at one point in time, but you set up the job correctly to where you might have a whole lot of stuff going in on the front, have some lighting buyouts and X, Y, and everything in between that. You might be out there for a month before the project even technically breaks ground, doing temp power stuff and stuff like that. So setting up that on the front half the correct way to where you can get your cash for all hours and the materials and everything put into that project, and also having a good relationship with your contractor or your owner, whoever it is, to communicate. Communication might be the key word of the day, but um, you know, they might see the piece of paper, but hey, here's what's going into this, and and the contract date might not be started technically, and we're doing the temp stuff, but I had XYZ resources to put into this, and I'm gonna have to collect to where we're on the upside and positive. So I think just that kind of comes part two of the gap between pre-con and operations, of having that conversation to where the operations can take it all the way up and set the project up correctly and efficiently to where you're being able to capture all you can.
You mentioned that one bad assumption about contract timing or payment terms can leave a contractor financing the job. What red flags do you look for in contracts, schedules of values, or billing structures before committing manpower?
It's a great question, and there's the finance the job term. We're most of the time AI billing, monthly terms and stuff like that. But getting favorable terms. It is very important. Come to an agreement on what you do agree on. But also reviewing contract pretty well, and I say pretty well, but very well. Keeping your eyes on it. Responsibility terms are one we especially look at. We like to make sure we're reviewing those responsibility terms to make sure there's nothing deeming us in any type of way to where if one false move's made that we're not in trouble due to a signed agreement. We've called them before, and I wouldn't say it's because contractors were trying to get us, but maybe just bad ways try to get. If there was anything going on a project, we've seen contracts that say, one verbal warning, I could kick you off. We like to get some red lines in there. Hey, look, verbal agreement's great, but just because you told my field supervision guys doesn't mean that they got it to me in time. We need written notices. We need this. We need that. Because at the end of the day, if I get a phone call and job's been freezed up or money's been held up because of bad wording, that's on me. And just catching that stuff, trying to getting out in front of that stuff. If they don't agree, you're allowed something that's agreeable or whatnot. And even if it's you can't agree on it, and you get it has to say the way it is. Well, now you know from the office to the field, and hey, look, guys, here's where we sit. And let's move accordingly.
Yeah. Reviewing the contracts is so important. You're using AI for that right now?
Not yet. We've been looking. I think we've even tested a few. We've got a guy in our office that is he's got a bird's eye on the contract, and he's very good. He knows where everything sits. I'd say I'm pretty well at reading one, but he can see a brand new contract. He knows what page to go to find where stuff can get us in trouble. So
Yeah.
but AI, the bigger you grow, you can't have one guy reading 100 contracts a year. Won't have time to do his day job, I call it. So we're moving there. I think we've like I said, I think we pumped a few through to see what gets put out.
The next section here is on technology, tools, and the future of efficiency. On the finance and tools side, Knight uses Procore, Acubed, QuickBooks, Excel, and is starting to explore Power BI and AI estimating tools. Where are you getting the most value today, and where do you see the biggest opportunity to level up project financial reporting?
I'm a big Excel guy. I remember when I first came in the office years ago, I didn't know what I knew what it was, but I didn't know that. I thought it was just something you learn in computer class. I didn't think, it would have a real life application. And then I learned how to use it. And I said, it's awesome. But, I'm partly an old school guy because I learned from the old school guys. It does what you want and you can manipulate it any way you want. But, AI reporting and those kind of budgeting tools and financial reporting, Power BI, to where you can kind of manipulate a report as you want to not only for financial reporting to see that side of it, but also to the operation side to see what was spent on what. And if you're doing the same thing going forward, to be able to either quote or bid something accordingly, or just in that side of the world is what I've also found myself, at my previous employer, we used Power BI very, very meticulously to where you could track hours down to the dollar, that was sent down to the overtime, to where, you might have saw a trend on a project that you normally probably wouldn't have saw due to financial reporting, to where going forward, if you do the same thing, you can account for that. And just being able to just full world view a project down to every little thing, leaves no trace behind and no excuse to not be able to dial something in as best as you can. But
You
that's where I do see a level up, is in 5 years there should be no excuse to where you can't track every penny spent on everything and see where it's going, and being able to course correct or correct going forward.
Yeah, the opportunity to level up. I'm glad that you're recognizing it too. You've emphasized that making life easier for field teams pays dividends, whether that's better tools, fewer clicks, or voice to text for daily logs. From your perspective, what does a realistic, high impact technology roadmap look like for a specialty contractor in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I've always said, I'm just an extension of the field guys. I'm just support. That's what it is. I just happen to sit in the office and doing it. But making their job easier ultimately makes my job easier. If I can give them the tools and ability to do what they need to do, without having to chase anything down or worry about something, I'm effectively helping myself out in the long run. And that's what it comes down to. But then that's also part of what we get hired to do, is drive efficiency. But as far as tools and fewer clicks, voice to text, I think we touched on that the other day, and just everything. Back in the day, it used to be pen and pad. Now it's iPads. It could be voice to text. Being able to streamline that, all those processes, and fewer clicks for them, and cutting the middleman of technology, and not technology itself out, but the middleman of just the manual technology to now the AIs and stuff. Look at the tool integration over the last 10 years. Milwaukee has been pumping out some amazing products, plumbing, electrical, HVAC wise, and technology eventually is on that climb as well, to where back in the day when you were standing in a ditch and had to strip some 500 NCM copper, you had to get your knife out, fight it. And if it was freezing cold, that sheeting was a pain in the butt. Now they got a tool to where you put it over there and you hit one. Technology is going to move to that, where you click one button and what you wanted to do is done, which it ultimately makes their job better, makes my job easier, and also kind of helps you alleviate that disconnect between the field and the office, and everything in between, which drives efficiency and drives profits.
Yeah. Technology is only going to get better. As AI, electrification, and data center demand reshape construction, how do you see the role of the electrical contractor changing over the next decade?
Growing, stepping up, stepping in, and taking on a lot. It everywhere you turn, we need more power, we need more electricity, we need more power plants, more buildings are getting built, the buildings are getting more, and AI's coming in, and AI needs electricity on top of everything else. We've all seen it in the headlines and the news, and in the job reporting, especially electricians are coming out of the roof. It's the new 6-figure salary job, and that's where it's going on the back of data centers, and I cut this data centers and the new AI and everything. The demand's going up, and industry, and multifamily real estate, our New York retail commercial properties are great. Like, one of these days there may be more data centers than there are Targets or Walmarts. And we're going to have to, you got to find the field guys to grow with that. You got to find the office guys to grow with that. And you got to find the guys to become an expert in the field, and drive those teams.
Yeah. Elon Musk and Jensen Huang, they're talking about data centers in the outer space. It's just,
Yep.
yeah,
I was listening to Jensen's podcast this morning, actually. And I love listening to those guys speak. Yeah, that's a room I would like to be in. That's a room that I would be the dumbest person in. I'd love to sit and just listen and ask questions. But the role of electricians and electrical contractors is growing significantly. And not only is it just growing to where the demand's more, but the demand of the actual aspect of electricians is growing, but the demand of knowledge and trade knowledge is growing to where it's not just pipe and wire anymore. There's a lot more to it, and we've got to get those guys in now and teach them the basics, but also grow their knowledge into this new forthcoming future we have.
Last section here, Zach, is on talent, workforce, and industry future. Also, this is the last question. You're passionate about attracting younger talent into the trades. If you were talking to a 19-year-old today, how would you pitch them on electrical construction as a career path with real examples from your own story to show the upside?
I've done it before,
Mhm.
and I'm still trying to do it. And kind of like I said a minute ago, if you're looking at it on the money side, electrician is the new $100,000 job. You can make that pretty quick in this trade these days in the field, but also wealth of knowledge. AI is taking out, not only is it's taking out some jobs, but it's bringing in a lot more and demand and just experience. What cooler thing is it to build a data center? What cooler thing is it to know what it takes to build a data center? Think about the things you learn and grow from in that. Don't get me wrong, we need our doctors, we need our lawyers, we need all that. I always tell my pitch, I guess you could call it, to young guys coming out of high school or whatnot. I was actually talking to one last week, a college guy at Colorado State that was like a junior and didn't quite know what to do, and I gave him everything I could to try to get him to join the trade. But if you don't know what you can do, go learn something. Go learn to do something with your hands. There's no better feeling to know that you can do something with your hands and build something that's impactful and meaningful. And also, I can't tell you how many times I drive down the road or built up electrical side, and that's a cool feeling. It's a great feeling. And growing within that and seeing the path, and kind of like to my personal experience. I was working in an 8-man shop, twisting wire nuts, as I say, and here I am. I've executed a project in all 50, Canada, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands. I've worked with contractors in Alaska, and in Canada. I've met some cool people on the way. I've met some cool owners. I've met some cool retailers, and the relationships you grow, and those relationships only do nothing but elevate you to be able to do more. That's a good feeling to me. That's a good thing to be able to have in your back pocket. If I get it more than I ever have of, oh, you're an electrician, I need you to come to my house. I got this problem. And nowadays it's not, and it's a valuable, fulfilling thing. And that's kind of my pitch and what I tell young guys. And if you come in and you get 2 years in and you don't like it, go be a doctor. We need those things. We need those people. They're as important as we are. And we all have this unison role of saving lives and building things to save lives and so on and so forth. But if you get in and you don't like it, you can always go back, and, the last thing you want to do is be in a 15-year career that you hate. And then it may be a little too late to go jump into the trade and figure it out. But I think the relationships you make, the experience you gain, and the impact you make is meaningful and last, and the day-to-day is something different every day. I think I touched on that one day the other day. It just, you never know what you're going to get in the morning. He's going to hold by lunch. I'm like, well, I did see you going this way, but I like it. And then next thing you know, it's 4 or 5 o'clock, and sometimes you got a few more hours of work to do, but it takes away.
AI is after the traditional white collar jobs now, the doctors, the lawyers, the stuff that's only like in the books. It can easily understand and do. Like the physical stuff that electricians do, it's very hard for any AI to do.
Yep. I'm a big podcast guy. I listen to all of them and any of them. And, if you don't want to listen to me, listen to Elon. Man, I can't tell you how many times I've heard him say that 2 weeks. Go be an electrician. I'm not just talking about my trade specifically, but he said that specifically. Go be an electrician. It's the new thing. And, I hate the jobs are leaving, but jobs are coming. Our jobs, trade jobs, contractor jobs, and we're building the future is what it is. And not that you're not making an impact or being in a meeting, saving lives or doing surgeries or what have you. On this side of the world, you're building the future, and that's a pretty cool feeling. And getting to talk to people that are talking about the 10-year future, the 5-year future, and putting ideas into lives that get to build them in 5 years. That's a great feeling. And a lot of people, especially back in the day, they have the nostalgia of, well, being an electrician, being a plumber, being a HVAC guy or what have you. You wake up. Yeah, like any job, you kind of have to do that. And But that's not just what it is anymore. You're not just driving down the street to a develop project and working construction and going home. You're having to learn things. A lot of guys these days, especially in my side of the world, in the trade, in the electrical trade, you got to have so many certifications to work on a certain project. Even Tesla's coming into the electrical world with these power wall systems and CO2 backup. Refrigeration's getting a lot more technical. Lighting's getting crazy to where there's so much out there to learn. Let's all be honest. We love our dollars. There's so much money to.
Thank you for coming onto the show. I had a great conversation with you.
Yep, I appreciate it, Rishi. Had a great time and great conversation.
Thanks for listening to Finance at the Job Site. If you found today's conversation valuable, share it with a teammate and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. You can listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or watch on YouTube. Just search Finance at the Job Site. Until next time, here is to building smarter, faster, and more profitable projects.